Welcome to episode 2 of the BDS podcast. I am your host, Rose Griffin, and we have an amazing show for you today. I was joined by 2 very special guests who are senior behavior analysts at BDS, Dr. Jonathan Kimball and Dr. Jim Hoko. If you don't know Jonathan, he is a PhD BCBAD, and he received a master's in special education from Columbia University Teachers College and a doctorate in applied behavior analysis and special education from The Ohio State University. He's worked in the field of special education for more than 30 years as a teacher, administrator, mentor, adjunct professor, and consultant with children of all ages in their homes and in public and residential private schools. He lives in Maine, where he started the state's first university course sequence in behavior analysis, approved by the Behavior Analysts Certification Board, and served as a founding member of the Association for Maine Behavior Analysis. Dr. Kimball has participated in research activities concerning the use of computers to promote independence and social communication by children with autism. He was a consulting editor for Focus for 12 years, on the editorial board of Behavior Analysis and Practice for 3 years, and has been a guest reviewer for 5 other journals. Dr. Kimball is currently a senior behavior analyst at Behavior Development Solutions. We were also joined on this episode with Dr. Jim Hoko. He is a dynamic professional with a proven record of educating and inspiring others, designing programs, conducting professional training, providing clinical service, and managing projects from concept to completion. He is skilled in building cross-functional teams, promoting cultural sensitivity, demonstrating clinical insight, and making critical decisions during challenges. In addition, Dr. Hoko is an adaptable and transformational leader with exceptional presentation, interpersonal, and communication skills. We had such a great time talking today. Jim received a PhD in developmental and child psychology from the Human Development and Family Life Department of the University of Kansas. He is a doctoral level BCBAD and is licensed to practice behavior analysis in Connecticut, New York, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. As a graduate student holding a professional traineeship with the National Institute of Mental Health, he conducted research and published articles in collaboration with Professor Donald Baer, Barbara Etzel, and Judith LeBlanc from KU's Department of Human Development and Family Life. We have an amazing conversation today all about changes in the field, supervision, you name it, we get into it. I'm so excited for this episode.
You're listening to the BDS podcast by Behavior Development Solutions, online at bds.com, your source for evidence-based training in applied behavior analysis since 1998. From premier curriculum supplement and exam prep to RBT training and continuing education, including live webinars and more.
Welcome to episode 2 of the BDS podcast. I am your host, Rose Griffin, and we have a wonderful episode and show for you today. We have with us Jim Hoko and Jonathan Kimball. Welcome to the show. It's so nice to have both of you on.
Hi, Rose.
So let's get started with the first question that I love to always ask here on this podcast and also on my podcast is, tell me about you and your journey into the field. So not sure who wants to start with that one, but let's hear it.
Okay. Well, I could start, I guess. I found myself after college when carpentry wasn't working out for me. I had a job at a place called Franciscan Children's Hospital in Boston, and decided that I enjoyed that kind of work. I was in a direct care job. I was called a milieu therapist, and decided I wanted to go on and pursue graduate work. And the kids, the 9 to 13-year-old boys who were part of that residential program at Franciscan, had the psychological services, therapy, social workers or psychologists, or both, but they also went to school there. And it was my impression that the special educators had more opportunity to work with them and build skills than the psychologists. And so with all due respect to psychologists, I decided to pursue a career in special education, and found myself getting into a master's program at Teachers College at Columbia. And I didn't really know what I was getting into at the time. It was a very behavioral program, and in the sense of strict applied behavior analysis, which of course is not what was going on at Franciscan Children's Hospital. And after doing it for a while, basically it was the data keeping that kind of flipped the switch for me. I had a full-time job while I was in school at a place called St. Joseph School for the Blind in Jersey City, and it was what was called a CABAS school at the time, a comprehensive application of behavior analysis to schooling, which was something that my advisor Doug Greer at TC had copyrighted essentially. And after plotting lots of data every day and dropping phase change lines and seeing changes, I was really sort of sold on this approach. And so I graduated and was teaching at a school in Quincy, Mass, as a private residential program, and got an invitation to consider applying to a doctoral traineeship at a leadership training grant at Ohio State University, which I thought, no, I couldn't possibly, get a PhD. And I literally put it in the trash, and my wife dug it out and said, "You could do this." And the rest was history. And it was fun because, of course, Cooper, Heron, and Heward was the textbook that introduced me to the thing at Teachers College, and Cooper, Heron, and Heward was my dissertation committee at Ohio State.
Oh, I love that. I love hearing these stories. So I've been certified 12 years, but I like hearing these stories from everybody's journey. And I was actually just at a conference, and I did a presentation on the ethics of SLP BCBA collaboration because I'm duly certified. And Dr. Heward he was talking before me, and then he actually stayed in the presentation and was interactive. And afterwards, I was just like, "Thank you so much." And he was like, "Oh, you did great." And I was like, "Oh my goodness, this is a whole moment," got pictures with them and stuff. So that's really neat because I'm here in Cleveland, but I didn't go to Ohio State, but it's fun to hear those stories. Well, thank you so much for sharing. What about you, Jim? How did you get into the field?
In a very strange way, or at least from a very strange place. I was born, and I'm going to start with this because there's a theme that's going to run through. I was born in Beaver Falls in Pennsylvania, and in the same hospital as Joe Namath. And if you don't know who Joe Namath was, he's a famous quarterback for the New York. Oh, good. She's pointing to me that she knows. That was important to my family because we were a football family coming from a football town, which is Johnstown, Pennsylvania. The only thing Johnstown is known for is floods. In 1889, there was a flood that caused 2,200 deaths because there was a sportsman's dam that wasn't maintained well by the elite, and it broke. But anyway, that was the claim to fame for Johnstown. Other than that, football. So in high school, I made the all-state team and was doing pretty good. But I wanted to go to an academic school. So I ended up going to Washington and Jefferson on a football scholarship. And I was going there for journalism. I told you this was a strange story. I wanted to be the next Geraldo Rivera, and I'm sorry to say that right now, but that's what I was going for. I got there and I was kind of confused, didn't really know what to do about my future. I quit the football team after the first year because I got knocked down in a mud puddle and was thinking, what the heck am I doing? I got to go to school. So I ended up getting in touch with a psychology professor. Rather, she got in touch with me. She came over to me and said, "Jim, you're doing really well. Have you ever thought of doing behavior analysis?" And I didn't know what behavior analysis was. Then I took a course in it, and it made sense to me more than any of the psychology courses I ever took, which is still true. And I became friends with this professor. Her name was Karen Bush. And to this day, I call her my hero because she was the one who pointed me in this direction. She was good friends with Murray Sidman and Rita Sidman. Mm-hmm. And the Sidmans, Murray wrote probably one of the best books on behavior analysis that was ever written, that unfortunately many new behavior analysts don't know about, which is called Tactics of Scientific Research. And I fell in love with the logic of that book. And Karen ended up helping me to get to the University of Kansas, where I initially worked with Barbara Etzel and Judy LeBlanc. Mm-hmm. And then my last 4 years, I worked with Don Baer, which was quite an experience. And graduating out of there, I didn't quite know what I wanted to do. There's a couple of academic positions, but I ended up taking a position, a clinical position, to develop some programs with a regional educational service center here in Connecticut. Ended up staying there for more than 3 decades, for 32 years, which is kind of unheard of these days, but had a lot of nice development there, and probably talk more about it later in this episode, but had a lot of experience working with a number of behavior analysts. But I came to BDS in the spring of 2021 after Steve Eversole extended an offer. I had known Steve for several years and worked with him during the time I was the executive director of the Behavior Analysts Leadership Council. And to make a long story short, this is like my second career working for BDS. So I worked for this company for 32 years, and now I'm the baby at BDS, right, Jonathan? 2 years in, so I'm just still learning all the ropes. Hopefully that wasn't too long, but that was
no. Yeah. Oh, I love it. That's so great. And of course, I know who Joe Namath is. We love football in my family. My son, unfortunately, he's 7, and he thinks he wants to work in the NFL as a player. And I keep saying, no, you don't understand. It's a whole business. Like, you could be safe and work in the business side. So, or maybe a lawyer. Who knows? No, thanks for sharing that. I love it. Well, there have been so many changes in the field, and it's interesting just to hear about how the field was and who you studied with, and that's always really fun for me. I like to hear all those names. So how does BDS stay on top of those changes?
Jump in here, Jonathan. So kind of take turns here. Although I have the newest input from users a lot, we have a question comment service that Jonathan can talk a little bit more about because he does a lot of that. Keeping up with the literature, staying informed with professional networking, and BDS attends many, many, many conferences. If you ever want to know about all behavior analyst analytic conferences in the country, you can just give us a call because we have a handle on all of them and have a spot in most of them. But being the newest of the senior behavior analysts, I was surprised at how receptive and responsive BDS is upon receiving new or updated information. There's an overwhelming motivation to get it right and to teach it right. And that ethic comes right from the top. It's from Steve, and it's why the company has and still is the core of our field's growth for so long.
Yeah, I would echo that as well, Jim, and it's hard to improve on that. The only other thing that occurred to me as you were talking was that to some extent it's also done for us. I mean, of course, BDS has quite a range of products. In fact, I wasn't aware of how much they had to offer beyond the modules when I joined the company. And there's a ton of stuff, but I think, in all honesty, it's the modules that they're known for. But what I mean by some of it being done for us is that we keep up with the ACB task list. And so currently we're in the process of updating things to conform to test content outline 6. Just had kind of got caught up with task list 5, and of course, things have been changed.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how it changes. We're an ACE provider at ABA Speech, so I always have a slide, because we're an ASHA provider too for speech therapists. So I always have a slide that says how we're going beyond the task list, because we know as ACE providers, that's a big part of what we do. But it's interesting to always be in touch with exactly kind of the changes, just being certified over 12 years. And definitely the field has really exploded since the start of BDS. And, I've talked to Steve. I think my relationship started with BDS last summer when I did a webinar for them about joint attention. And so it's just been fun to talk to Steve. I was talking to him the other day, and he was mentioning how he was at a conference and Skinner was there, and just some of the people that he met at some of the conferences. It was fun for me to hear those stories. So, the field has really exploded since the start of BDS, and it's kind of fun to look back at some of the stats or kind of how the field used to be or how it's grown. And I don't know if you want to comment on the kind of the growth in the field or the changes or anything like that.
So yeah, that interests with you. I mean, that Skinner comment. I actually didn't know what I was getting when I was young and I was starting into the field and I had the Murray Sidman contact, but I actually met and sat down. I didn't have dinner with Skinner, but I was at the table with him and Larry Stoddard and a few other people. And it's hard to imagine thinking back now, but I have a picture to prove it. So in case anybody ever needs it, I have that picture. But I think the conferences were a couple thousand people back then.
Right.
And if you wanted to become a behavior analyst, first of all, people, when they heard that back then, just thought FBI, that's the only place that they had a behavior analyst.
Yeah.
But there was just only a handful of places where you could go to get education to be one, like West Virginia, Western Michigan, UCLA. I went to Kansas. Jonathan, can you think of any others?
You said Western Michigan, right?
Yeah.
Early on,
a lot of those programs, like the University of Kansas, it wasn't even called behavior analysis. It was called the University of Human Development and Family Life. And there's a whole story to that, but we don't have time for that. But it was a very interesting world.
Right. And I mean, it wasn't ABA, right? I went to school to be a special educator, and I'm primarily a special educator. And so it's been interesting to experience the professionalization of a discipline, over the years, and not always comfortable, right? Because it was sort of a discipline that you brought to your practice, and as it became professionalized, of course, they had to develop the code of ethics and the content for which you're responsible, and draw sort of bright lines, and that can be an interesting process.
Yeah, I'm sure that has been really interesting for you to see how the certification has started. I mean, I know for me being a speech therapist and a BCBA, it's really fascinating because there are a lot more speech therapists, now than BCBAs, because that's been around longer in certification, and ASHA is our kind of BACB if you think equivalent. But it has been it's interesting to see the way that they do things differently. And every time the BACB sends out a new email or newsletter about changes that are going to be made to like the ethical code or the task list, I'm sure you guys are on all of those. I teach an ethics course, so that's always big for me. I'm like, oh gosh, that course I made on ethics 2 years ago doesn't count anymore because all the codes. Like one time I teach it here at Kent State. I've done it for about 5 or 6 years, and it's like one year we were in between books when Bailey and Birch were like updating their revised book with all the new code and task list items, and so we just did journal articles. But that was kind of a rough semester. I like to have a book,
I was going to mention, you're lucky there were books.
Right.
Unfortunately, I'm so old. Like there was no white Bible. There was no books. In fact, Don Baer's courses were articles and discussions, mostly. And you either passed or you didn't pass. There wasn't grading. It was a very, very interesting education. It's very different now. Now we have texts, and people believe that, what's in the text is what is. And if it's not in the text, then it might be a problem. But I keep reminding the people that live supervise, how do you think that book was created? There was a lot of work that was done prior to, the writing of that book. So.
Yeah, and it's interesting, even just with the Cooper book, so I've been certified 12 years, and so I teach this class at Kent State, and, there's a chapter on ethics in the book, and so they were nice enough to buy me the latest edition. And I'm like, wow, this book's almost 1,000 pages. Like, I'm like, this is very large compared to when I did it. So there's a lot more information on there. But even then with the ethics, something that I think is neat about the ethics is, there is information now about ethics and social media, which, in the last edition, there was nothing on that. So what I would do when I was presenting about ethics and social media, because I have an online business, is I would talk about these certain articles. And it was interesting because some of those articles are now in the ethics chapter, because it was just kind of neat to see that kind of growth. What becomes important is changing just as the field is changing so much. So with those changes, what are some of the challenges of this growth in the field, and how is BDS navigating that?
Thinking about, all these changes, the explosion of jobs, the academic programs, the behavior analyst certification and licensure, there's a ton that's been going on. But if you take a step back and you look at it broader, we're evolving. We've evolved from a science to a technology to a profession. And that's a progression that a lot of fields go through, including speech. When doing some research, it went through the exact same thing. But what you have with that is you have an accompanying decline of the emphasis on the first part, on the science. And we end up emphasizing the profession and a lot of the things that tag on to the profession. So BDS is constantly thinking about the science as well as everything else. So we put a lot of time and effort into staying abreast of the issues that are involved, not only just with the science, but with everything else that's affecting it, and trying to figure out what we can do to support and promote the field. We meet as a group and share information, discuss issues, decide what we can and should do to promote the science, the technology, and the profession. And that's one of the nice things that I found and was surprised at when I came to BDS. It's a nice group to sit and talk about things.
Yeah. It is. You guys have a nice cohesive group. I can vouch for that because I've been meeting with you guys the past couple months. So it's a really it's a nice group. Anything you want to add, Jonathan, to that one?
Yeah, I don't know if this exactly fits, but earlier Jim had mentioned the sort of the question comment feature, and we really do value input from our customers, and that's been so. I sort of earlier mentioned the BACB, which is sort of at the head of things or above, but sort of at the grassroots. We also hear from our consumers all of the time, and I think that their input very often helps us to evaluate the questions and to improve the quality of the product.
So the question and answer, so if somebody's listening and they're new to the podcast, I think we talked about this a little bit with Kim and Terry, but it's the question and answer is right on the BDS module. Like if you have a question about that, is that how you use that? Or can you talk to us a little bit about what that is if somebody's listening and they're new or haven't used the modules?
It's that question comment. And to be honest, I don't use the interface exactly. So it's been a while, so I'd be hard pressed to say where it is on the screen, but I think it's top right, but I could be wrong. Which will, you can submit a question about or a comment or concern or a complaint.
Yeah, right.
The content, I suppose, since we're talking about it, it might be one place to make the distinction. If there's concerns about download speeds or technical malfunctions, that's the question for customer support. But if there's a more substantive question related to the material, I don't understand this question, or why is it this way, or you've neglected to include something from chapter 20 in the new Cooper, Heron, and Hewitt book, right. Then that's the appropriate button to push before you submit the question.
Okay.
And I suppose one thing that people should know is that, of course, the order is randomized. So if you do it later and you make reference to the third question, I have no idea what the third question is, because the next time you take it, it could be the 19th question, and the time after that, number one. So.
Oh, yeah. I remember the modules. That's what I used to pass. I don't know if I told you that, but it was the Cooper book and the BDS module. So that's how I passed on the first time and just, started my journey as a BCBA. But that's good to know. And I
Same here, Rose, in the 1999. So the company wasn't very old, and it was still on CDs, and
yes,
the modules weren't even completed. So I only got 70%. They had done 1 to 7 of the 10 items or domains of the task list at that time.
Oh, it's fun to hear how, Steve was talking about how it's all started, and that was really neat. But I think what's interesting as a consumer and just somebody who's thinking about, how to prepare, because really even 12 years ago, there weren't a lot of options. It was like, oh, I'm going to use the BDS modules, but now there are more things. I think what's fascinating in just working with all of you in the team is that how many really smart people are in your group, and just analyzing the minutia of that. If somebody were to, use that feature and does have a question about the content that it's going to you guys, and you just are really analyzing this on such a level, because not because you just want people to pass the test, but because you really have that passion in creating really strong behavior analysts. And I think that's really great. So when you are creating specific content for the modules, what factors do you take into consideration?
For answer, I just wanted to say something about the modules because they're really easy to do. You remember I took mine in my test in 2009, and I was already supervising people who had passed. And so it was very nerve-wracking. And to make a long story short, I put a comment onto every question and used up most of my time. And I looked up and I had 45 minutes left, and I had to just rip through the rest of it. So thank God I passed. But I remember that when I was studying using the modules, I was studying with a friend who was also at my same level, and we didn't even get a chance to put an answer in before we got timed out. And we both looked at each other and said, "We're in trouble here." But a lot of the comments that are made is that it's difficult. It's not fun. But these modules are designed with a lot of thought. Mm-hmm. They are ordered specifically during the acquisition phase. There's a lot of stimulus control technology that goes into that, so that you're reinforcing the correct, reinforcement contingency. Each of I guess to answer your question, because I was just learning this over the past couple of years with BDS, but the objectives are all important. So you have to figure out what it is, what's the skill that you want to teach. And we reference the TCO now to figure out exactly what those are. And then you research those items with the literature that's out there, and you come up with a set of objectives. But then the design of the questions is fairly complex. It goes, we use the Bloom's taxonomy, which is a range of thinking skills from remembering, understanding, applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating. So there's actually an analysis that's done on each of the questions to see what skill level this question hits. So you could do a question that would just require you to remember something, but then there might also be a question that has you apply. And we all know that the BCBA, the BCB test is all about applications. So, but with the application, you need the lower level skills. So there's a lot of thinking that goes into this. It's not just a bunch of people trying to get the hardest question they can and put it in there to frustrate users. There's actually, going through, there's a money back guarantee. I don't want to talk about the details because I'm not sure I have the details, but the pass rate for people who have taken all of the modules to 100% is extremely high. I think it was something we're around 97.5, Jonathan, something like that.
Or even upwards of that, maybe.
Yeah, there's a lot of instructional technology that goes into these questions and these modules while they're frustrating you. So,
right. I mean, we have weekly meetings, the behavior analysts at BDS, and once a month we review articles. So this also ties into, a question you asked earlier, and often those are questions about sort of instructional design, articles about instructional design and pedagogy and interleafing and designing tests and, concept analysis and minimum rational sets and, that sort of thing. So that is part of our ongoing practice and preparation.
Oh, I love that. I love that you are doing all the hard work so that we can just be prepared for the test. Because yes, the BDS modules are difficult, but I just felt so very prepared. I knew that when I went into that testing center, that I was as prepared as I could be. And I think that's what's so interesting for me, just in working with all of you, is understanding all that goes into the modules. There's just so much analyzing and discussion with people who are so well informed. And I think that's really interesting, because I think sometimes when you're a consumer and you're thinking like, okay, well, what am I going to do? What should I choose? It's hard to know, but I love learning kind of the behind the scenes. So another area that I wanted to touch on is supervision. And I know you said, Jim, something about supervision. It sounds like maybe you supervise. I actually have another company, and we provide remote supervision. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this area. But, supervision is an area that has really changed with the growth of the field. So I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts about it, or if there's anything you want to discuss in that area.
Oh, I miss the supervision that I did with my former position. I miss that a lot. Other than that, I'm good, and I have a great job right now. But the topic is near and dear to my heart. In all the years that I've worked in behavior analysis and all the duties, the tasks, the endeavors, the thing that I've enjoyed the most is working with new behavior analysts, or soon to be behavior analysts, and the direct line staff, who often seem to know more than all of us. And I mean that sincerely. Supervision for me is leadership. It's leading not by way of making decisions or telling or teaching others what to do even, but leading by fostering growth, by using your own successes, mistakes, and experience to help others to reach their potentials. And I know that's a mouthful, but you know it when you do it, and it feels good. And it feels good to have someone come over to you and say, thank you. But this is an area of the field that our field is just recently trying to get a hold of. In my opinion, it hasn't done that to date, because supervision goes beyond the idea that all you need to know to be a good supervisor is behavior skills training. Yes, behavior skills training works. It's good, but the world is bigger out there. Training is the job. There's a lot more to do in that. You have to manage people and their problems. You have to motivate, you have to investigate, you have to ameliorate, you have to uplift people. And you need to do all this with, here I'm going to pitch one of my favorite books, Radical Candor. Radical Candor is a book by Kim Scott. And Kim Scott was a CEO coach for Dropbox, Qualtrics, Twitter, and a bunch of other tech companies. She was faculty at Apple University for things like YouTube and DoubleClick. She knows working with people. And her book is all about uplifting people. And she has this nice little grid. It's a 4-box grid, and it just is 2 dimensions. One is caring or compassion, and the other one is honesty. So a lot of new supervisors, you're a BA, you're an excellent BA, and you get promoted to be a supervisor. Well, guess what? Being a supervisor has very little in common with working with autistic kids. There's a whole different skill set there. So you have trouble. You have trouble giving feedback to people who were your friends, who were your coworkers, etc. So one small section of this is this idea that you need to be honest in your feedback. You don't want to be a jerk. You don't want to, I'm the boss, so I'm telling you what to do. You need to care about people, but care enough to tell them the truth. So I used her book actually with a number of the people that I worked with in my other job and in a couple of courses, and it was excellent. But it's a good example that we're not going to find everything we need to know in the field of behavior analysis. There's other fields out there, and those fields have things to offer. Speech, Rose, I'm glad you're a speech there.
Hey.
Some of the biggest blood battles with speech therapists in the beginning. We were first creating our EIBI programs years and years ago, and to this day, they're some of my best friends because we were doing something, we were collaborating, it was good for everybody. But I guess the main point is we need to teach people how to supervise, and that means more than just skill acquisition. It means human resource management and a bunch of other things.
Yeah.
Sorry, I talked too long on that topic. Jonathan?
Oh, not at all. I don't have that much to add. Again, you said it very well. I mean, I think I have also enjoyed supervising a great deal. It's something that I approach, as kind of a privilege and something with a great deal of humility, which I think is sort of a cornerstone of an empirical approach to things. Right, as a sort of open-mindedness and humility, and it also conveniently is a cornerstone, I think, to effective collaboration and working with other people. And speaking of the relationships, I guess a couple of books that I think that are also worth looking at are the LeBlanc, Sellers, and Ally book on supervision and mentoring, which has building meaningful and effective relationships right in the title. And it's these sort of soft stuff, these values that I am delighted that the field is maybe late getting into, but are, getting into, and, with I think leadership of folks like Leda LeBlanc and Bridget Taylor. And then, Ellie Kazemi has another excellent book on fieldwork and supervision as well.
Yeah, they are bright spots in the field. I've heard some of them talk, and I love that idea of care enough to tell the truth, because I think that's the truth too. When I'm doing trainings, I always say, if I'm working with a paraprofessional or, an RBT or supervisee, I try to make sure that I give them feedback, because it's like, it's going to help them in that one situation with that one client. But it's really going to have this ripple effect and give them that feedback that's going to help them help so many people over the course of their career. And I think sometimes that's really hard for people. That's like, just like you said, it's like you do. Sometimes you get fast tracked up this, now you're supervising, and it's like, what, I was just, with friends with this person. And then it puts you into this different dynamic. And I think when you're a young professional, that can be really hard. And it's hard. Those kind of relationships and dynamics are hard, especially if it's a small kind of clinic. So I think it's great to bring up those ideas. Yeah, definitely a topic I love to talk about too. And it is fun to see former people that I've worked with. I've been supervising for a long time. It's been interesting to see how supervision and just the requirements have changed and all of that. But I was just at a conference, and a lot of people came up to me that I've supervised or I've had in class, and they want to tell me what they're up to now. And that's always fun to see, oh, wow, now they're a BCBA and how they're working here, and they're doing this. So it is fun to know that you've had a little help in that. So we've covered a lot of different topics today, a lot of good dialogue and conversation. Is there anything else that we haven't touched on? Any last words that you want to share? It's okay if there isn't, but I just wanted to make sure.
I don't necessarily think so.
Okay. Okay, great. Well, it was great to have both of you on, and it was always great to talk. And thanks for tuning in.
Did you have something, Jim? What's yours?
You probably said it before. I think the one thing that I would tell people is there's a world outside behavior analysis that has value. Your collaboration skills are essential for your ability to succeed with kids, to your ability to supervise. People may not do things exactly how we do them. They might not have the same protocols and controls in their data, but they have data and they have compassion and they care about people. So, I think we need to work with people. That's my ending comment.
Yeah. When John Cooper retired from Ohio State, I wrote him a card that I thought captured the ethos with which I was inculcated there. It was a very intense sort of community experience being there for 3 years and really getting steeped in the culture. And one of the messages I think that I got from the culture was, and this is what I, said to John Cooper, was that you can be super dedicated without being dogmatic, and you can be super curious without being incredulous.
Yeah, that's great. Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for coming on. It was great to connect with you, and see you soon.
Thanks, Rose. Take care. Bye-bye.
For more information about BCBA exam prep and curriculum supplement, RBT training, CE courses, including live webinars and more, please visit BDS.com. We know that learning is a lifestyle, not a destination, and we thank you for including us in your journey by listening to this episode of the BDS podcast.